Great. All right, we are doing the late night edition of the Daf Yomi. So maybe a quicker Daf. Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Moshe and Susie Feder, Lili Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's father, Simcha Aryeh ben Yosef Tzvi, whose yahrzeit was on the 17th of Iyar. We are on the first wide line, Chaf Gimel Limud Aleph. We had just finished Rava, who explained to us that, from his perspective, his point of view, drinking is included in eating. So if a person says, I will not eat, and then he drinks, that is a violation of the neder, of the shvuah. Amar le Abaye, so Abaye says, Elamai, so what are you suggesting? Shtia bichlal achila. So you're suggesting now that drinking is going to be included in a shvuah of eating. If that's true, ema seifa. Take a look at the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah ends off with Shevuos shelo ochel v'shelo eshta. Right? If a person takes a shvuah, an oath, that he will not eat and he will not drink, both of those things, the achal v'shasa, and he eats and he drinks, so chayiv shnaim, then you're in violation of two oaths. Now, why should that be? Because kevan d'amar shelo ochel, once he makes the shvuah that says I will not eat, and drinking is included in eating, so then itzer le b'shtia, he's now prohibited all the drinking on him. Now, ki amar shelo eshta, when he goes back and makes the second oath, I will not drink, so am I chayiv? He shouldn't be liable. That's the old issue that we had of taking an oath on something that we already had prohibited. Right? So therefore, he shouldn't be chayiv. So, ilu amar shelo eshta trei zimni, for example, let's say he had said, I won't drink, and then he goes back and says, I won't drink a second time. Mi mechayev, tarti, would he be liable twice? No. You can't take an oath to make the same thing prohibited twice. So therefore, again, once he says, I will not eat, if that includes drinking, then if he goes back and says, I will not drink, he's just repeating the same vow. Why should he be liable twice? That's Abaye's question. Good. Oh, my mic is over here, which I think you can still hear from, so hopefully I think I'm okay, but we'll put it on my tie.
You can't remind you.
That's okay. Good, so, and if you can hear better now, that's why. Okay. So Amar Le, so Rava answers back to him, Hasam de Amar Shalo Eshte, v'hadar Amar Shalo Ochel. You're right, it's a good point. What's going on in our Mishnah is, he said, I will not drink first, then he goes back and says, I will not eat. Because eating is not included in drinking. So therefore, this is what we call the old Isser, the Isser Kolel business, right? Isser Kolel is when I can make something prohibited a second time if I add on something that was not already prohibited. So in this case, if I say I will not drink, and then I go back and I say will not eat, even though eating is going to include drinking, since it includes something more than drinking as well, so then the shvuah is chal, and it then makes the drinking doubly prohibited. So therefore, if he eats and drinks, you'd be chayav twice. So therefore, deshtia bechal achila isa achila bechal shtia leisa, because drinking is part of eating, but eating is not part of drinking. Okay, so therefore,
that makes sense.
Because if I say let's have a drink, I definitely am not going to take a bite to eat to something. But if I say let's have a meal together, then serving drinks is part of the meal, right? That's what we said yesterday. So aval, however, Shevuos shelo ochel v'shelo eshta. But let's say he said I would not eat and then I will not drink. Ve'achal v'shasa, and then he ate and drank. What would in fact be the halacha in that case? Eino chayav elach achas. He'd only be liable one. Right? Then that's what Rabbi says. Rabbi is conceding that Abaye had a good point, and that's fine. Okay, now, ihaki, the problem is that it's hard to understand the Mishnah that way. First of all, the Mishnah doesn't say that, right? You sort of have to flip the text, right? The Gemara doesn't point that out, but that would be an issue, because the Gemara actually says eat and drink, right, in that order. Ihaki, if that's true, adetani reisha shvuah shelo ochel ve'achal v'shasa eno chayav ela achas. The Mishnah starts off by saying, let's say he takes a oath, right? I will not eat, and then he eats and drinks. He's liable one. Okay, why? Because he only took one oath. Leisnei, why don't you tell us the bigger chiddush? The bigger chiddush would be Shevuah shelo ochel v'shelo eshte, that if he said that I will not eat and I will not drink, despite the fact that he took two vows, eino chayav elachas, he's only be liable once because drinking was already included in the eating.
What would be the situation when you have twice?
You'd be chayav twice if you said drinking first and then the eating, right? Because that's an Isser Kolel, right? Again, the Isser Kolel, we're going to be doing a lot of Isser Kolel issues today, if we get to them all. But Isser Kolel, the idea of the Isser Kolel is that once I say, I will not drink out of a cup, and then I go back and I say, I will not drink at all, that second oath works, and if I drink out of a cup, I'm chayav twice. Why? Because the second one prohibits things that weren't already prohibited in the first one. So if I say I will not drink, and then I go back and I say I will not eat, despite the fact that I will not eat includes drinking, since it adds on also eating, that second oath would be valid. That's the circumstance I would be liable twice. So now, the problem is that if what you're saying is true, Rava, you've explained, Abaye asked the question, Rava says, okay, you're right, that circumstance I'd be liable only once. Well, if you read the Mishnah doesn't go to the bigger Chiddush case. The Mishnah should have said the case if, even though I take two oaths, if I put my oath of eating first and then I drank, I'd only be liable for one anyway. Right? V'kol shekain, and then certainly I would have known shelo ochel luchudei, that if I would have said don't eat by itself, that I would only be liable one. Ella, so Rava then says, I got a better answer. Liolam kidikatani. It's leave the Mishnah the way it is. Don't flip the Mishnah around. Don't change it. Vishani hacha. This circumstance is different. You know why you're liable twice if you said I will not eat and I will not drink, despite the fact that drinking includes eating? Is kevan de amar shelo ochel, the had de amar shelo eshta. Because look at what the guy said. He said first I will not eat. Then he said I will not drink. Gali adate. It reveals that in his mind dehach achila de amar achila greitasahi. The food that he was saying didn't include drink. Otherwise, why would he have said, I will not eat and I will not drink? The reason why, the fact that he then went back and specified, I will not drink also, means that he had no intention of including drinking in his first oath. So therefore, when he eats and drinks, he's liable twice, because eating, the oath on eating did not include drink. Normally, an oath on eating does include drink, but this one will not. Amar Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi says, Masnisa nami daika. You can even see it if you really look closely at our Mishnah. Shevuos shelo ochel ve'achal. If he takes an oath that he will not eat, and then he eats. Ochlin she'ein ru'uyin lachila. But he eats food that is not appropriate to eat, right? Not edible food. V'shosa mashkin she'ein ru'uyin lishtia. Or he drinks liquids that you're not supposed to drink, so then he's pater. Now he's exempt because that's not considered to be eating. Haru'uyin, that means that if they were going to be edible, then he'd be chayiv. Now, v'amai, why should that be? Ha-shvuah shelo ochel kamar, he made a shvuah that he will not eat. So, therefore, if he made a shvuah that he would not eat, then why would he be liable if he drank drinks that are edible? That's drinking. So, therefore, a proof that drinking is included in eating. No. Not necessarily true. Dilma de Amar Tarti. Maybe it's both circumstance where the Mishnah is sort of shortening his words, but he said both things in reality. Shevuos shelo ochel, shevuos shelo eshta, where he said, I will not eat and I will not drink. So then if he eats, then he's chayav for the eating and drinking for the drinking. So Rava's point is valid, but it's not clearly proven in the Mishnah. That's the point. So that's where we leave it. That Rava still makes his point that drinking is included in eating, but it's not necessarily 100% proven from the Mishnah. Okay, Shevuos shelo ochel ve'achal pas chitin. Now he takes an oath, and he says, I will not eat, and then he eats multiple types of food, breads, then he's liable one time. However, if he took an oath that he will not eat bread of wheat, and he will not eat bread of barley, and he will not eat bread of spelt, then he eats all three of those things, he's violated three oaths. Okay, because each of those separate breads is a separate oath.
But we have one or two.
For which?
If we write three oaths.
Then he'd be liable for three. Violated three oaths, you're liable for three. Vedilma, well, wait a second. Now we have to try to figure out what is it that he meant when he said, I will not eat wheat bread, I will not barley bread, I will not eat spelt bread. We said that it means he's taking three oaths. An oath not on barley bread, an oath on wheat bread, and an oath on the spelt bread. Okay, that's what we're suggesting. How come? Maybe that's not what he meant. Dilma lemifter nafshe machri naisa kasi. Maybe what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, you know which breads I'm liable that I won't eat? These three. Bread, I will not eat wheat, I will not eat the barley, and I will not eat the spelt. Oat bread I'll eat, right? By specifying the three that he won't eat, he is essentially saying, I am allowed to eat the rest of them, right?
Right.
So therefore, maybe that's his point, not to take three separate oaths. So no, that's not true, because if that's what he meant, to exclude all other things, all he would have said is, I won't eat wheat or barley or spelt. Why do you have to say, I won't eat wheat bread, I won't eat barley bread, I won't eat spelt bread? by saying each of them, clearly his intention was to say a separate oath on each of those types of bread.
Maybe that's the form he needed. Maybe we think like kernels of
Vidilma lakus. So then maybe if that's what he would have said, so then potentially that all he meant is to chew on the kernels, right? Now as all he says is I'm not going to, I will, so therefore he has to specify the bread. Well, if that was the case, then he should have said, if all he was trying to do is exclude the bread, he should have said, you're right, he should have said bread of wheat, of barley, and of spelt. He didn't have to say bread. Okay? By splitting it up each one, meaning he was specific, each type of bread. Vidilma, still, maybe that's not what he would mean either. Dilma paschitin le'echol, sor vekusmin lakus. Then maybe he meant that he wasn't going to eat the wheat bread, but he wasn't going to chew on the kernels of the barley or the spelt, because he only specified bread by the wheat bread. No, dahavale lememar, what he could have said then was paschitin v'shel sor and v'shel kusmin. I won't eat bread of wheat or of barley or of spelt. Then it specifies bread. Still, chav gimel beis v'dilma al yedei taruvos. Maybe then what he's saying is, I will not eat bread that contains all three of these things. I will only eat bread of wheat, of barley, of spelt. Seems to imply that it needs to be the piece of bread that has all three things in it. Multigrain bread, right? So ema, no, so what he could say is, v'kein shel sa'orim v'chein shel kusmin. Also, he could have said then, he should have said, okay, I will not eat wheat bread, and also similarly barley, and also similarly spelt. Okay, so pas lamali. Why does he then specify? Since I could have had a different formula, he could have said something different if he meant something different. Why does he say wheat bread, barley bread, and spelled bread? Shmamina lechalek. Still not teach me. Each type of bread is a problem. So therefore, he's going to be liable for 3 different oaths for eating the 3 different types of breads. Okay, that's again. And what we're doing here is really there's no definite way of interpreting his words. We're just saying what is the most realistic interpretation. And so if we offer him, we say, well, why didn't he say it this way? We just say, well, if he would have interpreted it, we would have interpreted it a different way. So that's how we go. Shevuos shelo eshta. Now we're going to go back and do this again with drinks. Shvuah, I will not drink. V'shasa mashkin harbein, he drinks lots of drinks. Eino chayav elachas, then he's only liable for one. But if he specifies each type of drink, right? He's not going to drink wine, he's not going to drink oil, he's not going to drink honey, and then he drinks each one, he's chayav on each and every one. Bishlama, hasam da'amart, mi yasrale, pas lechiyuva. So I understand when we said the bread, the reason why we included 3 different types was because he said bread each time, right? He said bread of wheat, bread of barley. That we knew was each one a different type of loaf of bread. Elahacha, my havalei lememar. Here, he doesn't say there's no bread of wine or what. There's all he just said was wine and oil and honey. What was he supposed to say? Maybe by saying that he was going to drink wine, he wasn't going to drink wine, oil, or honey. He meant to allow himself to drink everything else. So, Amar Rav Papa, so Rav Papa says, you're right. What's going on is these 3 beverages are sitting here in front of him. Right? Shahaya lo lomar, and since the 3 beverages were sitting there in front of him, there was something he could have said. He could have said, Shevuos shelo eshta elu. I will not drink these. And the fact that he specified which ones he was not going to drink means he was taking a separate oath for each of them. V'dilma elahu delo shasina achrini shasina. Maybe if he had said, I will not drink these, then he would have meant that I will not drink these, the ones that are right there in front of him. But he would drink other oil or other honey. So, Ella, so you're right. De'amar Shevuos shelo shasina kagonelu. He says, I will not drink things that are like this. Right? Okay. Dilma kagonelu de lo shasina, b'tzir mehacha utfei mehachi shasina. Well then, maybe he was specifying the amounts, saying, if I will not drink this amount, or I will not drink less than, but I could drink less than this or more than this. Ella, so you're right, kagon de'amar Shevuos shelo eshta mimin elu. What he could have said is, he could have said, I take an oath not to drink from these types. Okay? If he would have said from these types, then that would have explained that he was not drinking any wine or oil, right? So that, therefore, by specifying each one, it's a separate oath. Vidilma, well, maybe if he would have said that, maybe that meant min eluhu de lo shasinu, meaning that he shouldn't drink from these, right? It's from these. So, inhu gufaihu shasina. I won't drink this type, but I will drink these, right? I won't drink these types of drinks. but I can drink actually these cups, right? I won't drink other ones that are like this. So ema, so rather what he could say is, shalashta elu uminaihu. He would say, I won't drink these or other drinks that are like these. So therefore that's the solution, right? So the fact that he said wine, oil, or honey is 3 separate oaths. Because there's another way he could have specified this oath otherwise. If there was no other way for him to specify the oath, then we would interpret it differently. Rav Acha breder of Ika Amar, Rav Acha the son of Rika said, "B'mesarhev bo chavero askinan." You know what we're talking about? We're not talking about a situation where he had the drinks lying there on the table. His friends were bugging him to drink. They were saying, drink, 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 drink. Peer pressure. Da'amar lo, bo shesei miyayin v'shem udvash. The guy was saying, you know what, come over to my house, we'll drink some wine, we'll drink some oil, and we'll drink some honey. I don't know, the oil doesn't fit into the... I don't know.
That was a thing back then?
I guess it was a thing.
They see what it's for, why they drink oil.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like olive oil? Is that what we're talking about?
What?
Yeah.
They drink. Oh, just.
So just drink straight.
I know Russians.
They were old school.
Russians drink olive oil before they.
That's right.
Before they drink alcohol.
Is that really?
Yes.
So there you go.
It mixes in with the oil and doesn't get you as drunk.
All right, there you go.
That's tricky.
Lubricates.
Seems whatever. Anyway, they should have said Shevuos shelo eshte imach yayin. So therefore, he takes an oath: I will not drink wine with you, v'shemen udvash, or oil or honey. So lama li. So he says, why would he say all 3 of those things? The answer is the chayav okal achas v'achas. So he would be liable if he did any one of those 3. So that was the circumstance. Okay. Tanan hasam. We learn in the mission over there. Tein lichitin usorin v'kusmin sheyesh li biyadcha. Right? So let's say a person says, you know, you have my barley and my wheat and my spelt. I gave it to you to hold on to. I want it back. Right? And Shevuos she'ein lecha biyadi klum. Guy says, I don't have anything. Right? This is what we call Shevuos hapikadon. Shevuos hapikadon is different than Shevuos bitui, with the Shevuah that we've been talking about, with bitui pronunciation, in that I can take a Shevuah, in all of these circumstances, we had these Shevuos that we've been talking about so far, you can't double up on those Shevuos. Because if you double up on the Shevuos, you're just repeating the same Shevuah that you've already made. It's meaningless. When it comes to Shevuos Pikadon, each denial, and then if you get asked for it again, is a separate opportunity to admit that you really have it. So if you deny it, and then you deny it again, and then you deny it again, you could be liable for each one of the times that you deny it. That's a little bit of a difference by a Shevuos Pikadon, a Shevuah where you deny an oath that we know. We're going to use Shevuah. Shevuah's okay? We got oath, Shevuah. That's good? Okay, good. So I don't want to make sure. So Shevuah, right? I know. It's like, Shevuah, if I say that if I'm going to take a Shevuah, that I don't owe you anything, right? I have no any items. That's a denial. If I'm lying, I have to bring a korban, also korban olaviore for that. So now this person says, "Eino chayev ela achas," right? So if he says, this guy says, "You owe me 3 things. You owe me wheat, barley, and spelt," and the guy says, "I don't owe you anything." That's only one denial. It's not a denial of 3 things, right? That's a little bit of a chiddush, right? However, if he says, I deny having wheat, barley, or spelt, then chayav al kol achas v'achas. Now he's liable for every one of them. Okay? Now, the Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, afilu pruta mikulam mitztarefes. Now, he says, even if I have the equivalent, in order to be liable for the shul, I have to deny a pruta value. Right, this pruta is the smallest value coin that they had, right, which is worth about 3-4 cents, right now. So therefore, they have the smallest value coin that they had. That has to be the amount in order for me to be liable for some kind of for denial. So let's say the entire amount that I had, the wheat, the barley, and the spelt altogether equaled 1 pruta. I'm still liable. Okay, now that becomes problematic.
If I break it up.
Correct. It's either I have to be one or the other, right? If I break it up, then I should need a pruta for each one of them in order to be liable. If I'm combining it all together, then I could be liable for having a pruta amount, but then I should only be liable 1 korban. So therefore, this, you can see already sort of the self-contradiction in this Mishnah here that we are having here, that if the person denies wheat, barley, and spelt, how could I be liable both for 3 denials and also allow me to combine the entire thing together to be liable one time. Either I'm splitting them up or I'm holding them together. But I can't split them up and hold them together simultaneously.
But didn't we say that as long as the full kernel, like we said before about...
That's a birya bifnei atzma. But yes, we did suggest that, but that was a machlokas, and that was where we had argued that the Chachamim did not agree with the concept of birya when it comes to a kernel. Right? They only held that way with a living item, something was alive. So now, Pligi bo Rav Acha v'Ravina. So Rav Acha and Ravina have an argument on how to interpret this. Chad Amar iprati michayev aklali lo michayev. He says that the detail items, right, you'd be liable for, not the generality. V'chad Amar aklali nami michayev. The other one says you're also liable for the general. What does that mean? That means, how many denials do I have here? I don't owe you anything. When a person says, I don't owe you wheat, barley, or spelt, how many denials do I have? 3. I might have 4. Ready? How would I count 4? I don't have anything. Not wheat, not barley, not spelt. So therefore, the opinion that says I'm liable for the general denial and then the 3 specifics, and the other opinion says, no, I'm only liable for the 3 specifics. Only, like we said, the normal way of looking at that is 3 individual things. But I also, by denying all 3 of the things, I'm also making a general denial that I don't have anything.
Yeah, but that would be a problem when we said about achila and shtia, because we said before, achila, and if I said I'm not going to eat, and then I'm not going to eat. Well,
not a problem when it comes to Shevuos Pikadon, though. Why? Because we said Shevuos Pikadon, you can be liable twice on the same, denying the same object.
That's double jeopardy.
Which is okay with Shevuos Pikadon. Why? Because the Shvuah of denying that I owe anything, every opportunity I come to you and I say, give me back my thing, and you swear that you don't have it, is another opportunity for you to be truthful and honest and hand it back to me. So therefore, it's a completely new denial. It's not the same thing as where I will not drink, and then I say I will not drink a second time, where I'm prohibiting something that I've already prohibited. This is a new denial. I denied it yesterday, and now I'm denying it a second time today.
Well, what if he really doesn't have any?
Then he's not liable for anything. He's telling the truth.
no, but that one...
How do you know?
Well, he knows, right? That's why at some point he's going to admit it and he's going to own some sacrifices.
Right.
But the general, the specifics were contained in the general, so you didn't make... I hear what you're saying, but if it's one statement, isn't it one statement?
Well, this is the argument, what's included in that statement.
Right.
So this is the argument between Rav Acha and Ravina. One says that it's only the specifics, and one says you got to look at the specifics plus the general denial also. Okay. So, Hachamai. So, let's go talk about, one second here, where would I go? Okay, so Hachamai, so how does this apply to our topic at hand? Amar Rava says, Hachi Hashta. So he says, let's take a look over there. Hasam Mechayeva Klalu Mechayeva Prata. He says, you know why you would be liable for the one second, let me show the Hachamai. Right, that's Rabbi Yochanan. Shavpruta, Musavrak al-Resha, Seifa. Right, so when Rabbi Yochanan says, right, so this statement, this I just mentioned, Rabbi Yochanan's statement was that even if you have a pruta that combines all of them, so the question is, what is Rabbi Yochanan's statement going on? Is he talking about the first case where he denies I don't have anything? Then of course it was one general denial, so therefore I can combine all the items together. The other, but if he had denied each specific individual item, then each specific individual item would have been viewed separately, and you couldn't combine the 3 of them together. Or according to the other opinion, that even if he denied each one individually, there's a general prohibition as well, and so therefore the general prohibition, he could also be liable a 4th asham. Basically, it's not a korban oviyar, it's korban asham. He'd be liable a korban asham, a guilt offering, and for the 4th violation, which is to deny everything. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Now, what happens here in our circumstance, right? If a person says shvuah that I will not eat bread of wheat, bread of barley, bread of spelt, okay? Now, should you say that he's liable for violations because he said, I will not eat, and then he specified the 3 different types of bread. So is it the same machlokes, where you're going to be liable 3 times or you're going to be liable for 4 times? So Amar Rava,
One denial, one was right.
so Rava says, Hachi hashta. How could you compare the two? Hasa mechayev kolu mechayev prata. You know why in that circumstance, in the circumstance with denial, the denial you can be liable for the general and the specific. Deha I mishtava v'hadar mishtava mechayev tarti. Because, as we were suggesting, or we already saw, if I deny it twice, I can be liable for the same thing that I denied twice. Therefore, if I have some bread, if I have some wheat, and I have some barley, and I have some spelt, I can be liable a 4th one for having wheat, barley, and spelt. Why? I already was liable for the wheat, the barley, and the spelt. The answer is because I can be liable twice. It's 2 different denials. So I can be liable multiple times for the denial, multiple times for the same item. However, Hacha, here in our case, where he took the oath, I will not eat the different types of bread, if you're going to tell me that the general rule of, if you hold of the general rule that I will not eat includes all of them, then why would you be liable for any of the 3 individual ones at all? Because once I wasn't allowed to eat anything, and then I specified not bread, this bread, or this bread, or this bread, the general one already applied to all of them. So mushpa v'yomed, who he's already included in the previous oath, and so therefore he'd only be liable 1. I wouldn't even be liable 3. So therefore, that in the case of our Mishnah, for sure that's not applicable. So therefore, they draw the distinction between those 2 cases. Okay, good. Which is an introductory already to where we're going to get into Shevuos Pikadon later on and how that oath works a little bit differently. Okay, now, Shevuos Shelo Ochel. Person takes new issue in our Mishnah, right? Person says he's not going to eat, and then he eats inedible items. So ha gufa kasha. So this already is its own self-contradiction. Here's the problem in our Mishnah. Amar, you said Shevuos Shelo Ochel. You said you took an oath that I will not eat. V'achal ochlin she'en ruyan lechila. And then you ate things that are not edible. V'shasa mashkin she'en ruyan yishtia. And you drank things that were not edible. Okay? Potter, then you're exempt. Because you didn't eat.
What would you eat that's not
Paper. You ate a piece of paper. Sand, dirt. Right? That's not, doesn't work.
It's a pretty stupid thing to do, though.
Paste. I don't know if you ever see first graders. It's amazing. It's amazing. Okay.
Been there, done that.
Not time.
Not those first graders.
The only difference, in Eitz Chaim, they also eat paste, but they know that you're not supposed to make a bracha on it. Know that they're not chayav for their shua on it. That's the difference. They still eat the paste. Okay. Now, then, so that's what it says first, okay? You haven't violated your oath if you ate something inedible. V'hadar tani, then later on in the Mishnah it says, Shevuos shelo ochel, if he says I will not eat, and then v'achol nevelos trefos shkatzim v'ramasim, then he goes ahead and he eats non-kosher meat. Then he's chayiv, then he is liable. So, Maishna Reisha de Potter, Maishna Sefer de Chayiv. Why would the beginning he would be liable? And in the case where he's eating non-kosher things, he is liable. After all, it's not edible, right? You're not allowed to eat it. So, halo kasha. So it's not a contradiction. I'll give a couple of answers. Reisha bistam v'seifa b'mefarish. So the answer is, the first case in the Reisha is when he doesn't specify any amounts, right? So therefore his prohibition, right, he doesn't specify any amounts, and therefore he's exempt because he ate this amount and he isn't liable. However, in the Seifa, right, when the Seifa is where he is specifying.
Why would that be the answer? Like, isn't it?
Because the answer you're going to give is coming up later. I know an answer you're thinking of, and it's coming up, right? One's edible, one's not. It's edible, it's just not kosher. That's coming. Right, that's the answer you're thinking of is coming on a few lines.
Right, well, wouldn't you assume that's the first
The first answer, I would have thought the first answer also. But I'm not bothered because it's the second answer, except you're right. Theoretically, somebody could ask the question, why isn't the... But you should be less bothered knowing that it's coming up. That the answer is coming up. Okay?
What is nevelos?
Nevelos is meat that's not slaughtered properly.
Meat that's not
Slaughtered properly.
non-kosher meat.
Non-kosher meat, that's correct. From a kosher animal, it's not a kosher meat.
Okay.
So, right? If he specifies, right? In the second case, he specifies, right? So in the first case, he doesn't specify, I won't eat. And then he eats dirt. That's not eating. In the second case, he says very clearly, I will not eat non-kosher meat. And then he eats this non-kosher meat. Then he's chayiv. Why? Because you made clear what was your eating that you were thinking of, the non-kosher meat. Normally we would say that when you said eat, you didn't include things that you couldn't eat. But you do, because you specified it. So, okay, but that's not going to help us, because mefarish nami gufe tikshi. Because you should still ask the question. Let's say the guy did make an oath. He said, I will not eat non-kosher meat. Why should that vow work? Because amai mushba mehar sinaihu. That's already prohibited from the Torah. And we know that you can't make an oath on something that's already prohibited. So that's a Shevuos shav.
He does the opposite.
Which?
I will not eat kosher meat.
Then that works. Then he could, right? But then he wouldn't be liable if he ate the non-kosher meat for the oath. Right? We're looking for a circumstance where he would be liable for the non-kosher meat. So the answer is Rav Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan Da'amri. Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, we've seen this before. Bekolel dvarim hamutarim im dvarim ha'asurim. This is the Isser Kolel again. Isser Kolel is, what he does is he includes the prohibited items with the permitted items. By making a shvua where he doesn't only specify, he makes a prohibition where I'm going to include I will not eat the non-kosher meat and the kosher meat. So if he says I will not eat non-kosher and kosher, then now by adding in the kosher, the non-kosher goes into it as well, and the shvua works. For Reish Lakish Amar, Reish Lakish says, no, this is what's going on, is he's adding on an oath that I will not eat half a kazayas volume, because from the Torah, I'm not allowed to eat a kazayas, an olives volume. But eating a half a kazayas wouldn't make me liable. So I take an oath, I will not even eat half a kazayas. Then I'm going to be liable for the oath for half a kazayas. V'ali b'derabanan and ibestam, v'ali b'derabbi Akiva. B'mafarish chatzi shur liba derabanan. If he specifies a half amount according to the Rabbanan, ibestam liba Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't have to specify at all, because remember Rabbi Akiva said that if he swears, it's included even in the smallest amount. To Amar, because he says Adam oser atzmo bekol shehu, a person prohibits upon himself even in the smallest amount. Okay, Bishlama Rabbi Yochanan Lo Amar Kareish Lakish. Now we've quoted this 3 times already. So why is it that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't agree with Reish Lakish? Why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan doesn't say he specified in half amount? I understand why Rabbi Yochanan doesn't know. Why? Because he doesn't want to make the Mishnah a case where it holds like Rabbi Akiva or any one particular opinion, right? Ella Reish Lakish might time lo Amar Rabbi Yochanan. The question is, why doesn't Reish Lakish hold like Rabbi Yochanan? So Amar Lecha, he'll say to you, Ki amrinon Isser Kolel be Isser Abba Me'elov. He says that there's a rule by Isser Kolel. Isser Kolel is a concept, right, where one thing can become prohibited, it can become prohibited a second time, only if I'm adding something new to this prohibition. That doesn't work by Shevuos, says Reish Lakish. That is a rule that applies if the prohibition comes naturally. How so? I have non-kosher meat, and then Yom Kippur comes. Yom Kippur, I'm not allowed to eat anything. If I eat the non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur, I'm in violation of 2 things. Number 1, the non-kosher meat. Number 2, eating at all. And even though the meat was already prohibited before Yom Kippur because it was not kosher, since Yom Kippur is a Isser Kolel, it includes more things, then the meat is going to accept that second prohibition. But, says Reish Lakish, that only works in that kind of a circumstance, where it was non-kosher and then Yom Kippur came. It doesn't work in a circumstance where it was non-kosher and then I took an oath. Man-made prohibitions don't create an Isser Kolel, says Reish Lakish. Only natural, the rule of Isser Kolel only applies to naturally occurring averos. Okay, so haba al yedei atzmo lo amrinon. We don't make man-made prohibitions. Man-made prohibitions don't work that way. Chaf Daled Amid Aleph 24a. Bishlam al Reish Lakish. So fine, according to Reish Lakish, mishum haki kapater Rabbi Shimon. So I understand, according to Reish Lakish, I understand why Rabbi Shimon says that you would be exempt. Let's see what we're talking about. Tanya Winner Brisa. Rabbi Shimon says, Kol shehu lemakos. He says that if a person violates any prohibition, he eats any amount of a food that is prohibited, you get malchus for eating any amount. Velo amru kazayas, and remember what he said, that the only rule of an olive's volume of prohibited for eating is el korban. That's only for the sake of being liable to bring a sacrifice. El the Rabbi Yochanan, the question is according to Rabbi Yochanan, my taima de Rabbi Shimon de potter. Why would Rabbi Shimon say that you're exempt? Right? Why would Rabbi Shimon say you're exempt?
Well, we already said in the Gemara, he doesn't hold by any volume. Rabbi Shimon. Remember we talked about this with Rabbi Akiva.
Midi hu taima el mishum iser kolel. So, sorry, that's the answer. He goes. So he says, "Velo amru kazayis ela lekorban." He says, "El Rabbi Yochanan," according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that an iser kolel would be effective. So the question is, according to Rabbi Shimon, why would he be pater? Why would he say pater? Shouldn't Rabbi Shimon agree that it's an iser kolel here? Right? Because he's now chayiv. We're adding the chiyuv on, because now even less than a kazayas amount is liable, and before only the kazayas amount was liable. Right. So we should have an iser kolel. So why would Rabbi Shimon say you're exempt? So the answer is, one second. Midi hu taima el mishum iser kolel. What's the whole rationale? Why we're saying that why the second oath is going to be effective? Why the oath is going to be effective? Iser kolel is the. I know I'm
You're such a teacher.
I know. I hear everything. I hear the guy chewing gum in the back corner of the room. It's like, Iser kolel is when I have something that's prohibited,
Right.
and then I add a second prohibition on top of it, because the second prohibition not only prohibits that one item, but prohibits more items as well. Okay? The example that we were giving is the non-kosher meat. It's non-kosher, I can't eat this piece of meat. Mm-hmm. Comes Yom Kippur, I can't eat any meat or any food. Therefore, this non-kosher meat now acquires a second prohibition, because it's not only prohibited because it's not kosher, but it's also prohibited because of the broader prohibition. Now, if this meat became not kosher for a second reason, right? Let's say this meat was not sorted properly, and also it was treif, meaning that there were holes in the lungs or whatever it was, and now I've got two prohibitions. Having two prohibitions, one fall upon the other, that's not going to give you two prohibitions, because one is not more broad than the other. You need to have the second prohibition be more broad in order for that second prohibition to fall upon it. That's the concept of Iser Kolel.
Example, Yom Kippur.
The example of Yom Kippur, or the example that we keep trying to use, which is a oath, which is more encompassing than the original prohibition, where the original prohibition is that you need a kazayas in order to bring a sacrifice, and then I take a shavua, and the shavua is going to be of the smallest, include even the smallest amount, so therefore it's an Iser Kolel, because now I'm including more amount, right? More meat is now prohibited, or more types of things are prohibited than were prohibited before.
And what's the punishment for that?
That's going to be a korban, a sacrifice that we've been talking about. This is a korban olav yored, this elevation offering. Right? We call it elevation, but it's not.
I'm confused, because didn't we say before Rabbi Shimon didn't hold up any shiur?
Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of any shiur when it comes to malchus.
No, I thought Rabbi Akiva didn't hold up any shiur.
Rabbi Shimon actually holds, right? He says that you're right. Rabbi Shimon holds no shiur when it comes to shvua. Right? Or he says actually he holds the slightest amount when it comes to shua. Right. So therefore we should say, why is it that Rabbi Shimon says you're pater? Because by taking any oath, you're adding on to what's prohibited. Right?
No.
It should be an Iser Kolel.
Right.
Why is Rabbi Shimon saying you're pater here?
Right. I didn't even say why is he?
So you're asking the Gemara's question. The Gemara's right. The question is, why is Rabbi Shimon saying you're exempt? Rabbi Shimon should say you're liable, because since he's holding you liable even in the smallest amount when you take an oath, it's an Iser Kolel.
Right. I would say even the Iser Kolel is not. It has no shaykhs to the question, because he holds that it doesn't even have to be a kazayas ever. So the question itself.
Yeah, but what we're saying is we're trying to add the second oath. We're trying to add the two prohibitions together. Right? The prohibition, the natural thing that would be prohibited for this item, right? The nevela, it would be prohibited once. And then we're saying I can't take an oath on something that's nevela, because now it's an Iser Kolel. But we're saying it's not an Iser Kolel for some reason. But according to Rabbi Shimon, it automatically should be an Iser Kolel, because as soon as I take the shvua, I'm prohibiting even a less than a kazayas amount, which wasn't prohibited before Mihar Sinai.
Right.
So therefore, it should be an Iser Kolel. So the answer is Rabbi Shimon Latame delays le Iser Kolel. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of Iser Kolel. That's the answer. Shimon doesn't hold of that concept. Now, Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of that concept. That's why Rabbi Shimon says you just can't never add an Isser on top of another Isser. It just doesn't work. Right, there you go. I figured you were adding, that's why I wanted to say that one line, to see if that answered everything. Titania. How do we know that? Because we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Shimon says, Ha'ochel nevela b'yom kippurim. Here's our case. Somebody eats nevela, non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur. Pater. You're exempt. So bishlam al reish lakish mishkachas la bilav vehain. So fine. According to reish lakish, right? So I can understand that we can have let's say that's the end of it. The nevela, sorry. Rabbi Shimon Omer Ocha Nevela Yom Kippur is pater. That's the end of that statement, right? Rabbi Shimon says that somebody who eats nevela on Yom Kippur is exempt. Why? Because he's not chayav the second prohibition, because the isser of nevela, he cannot be chayav isser of Yom Kippur when something is already prohibited as nevela, because he doesn't hold the concept of isser kolel to add on the second prohibition of Yom Kippur on top of it.
What happens if someone makes a shua that he's not going to eat on Yom Kippur, and then he eats on Yom Kippur?
Then that won't work, right? That's not going to work according to anybody, right? Shvuah, I won't eat on Yom Kippur, won't work according to everybody. Why? Number one, that it won't work according to everybody is because it was already prohibited. And according to Rabbi Shimon, who would say, well, on Yom Kippur, I wouldn't have been able to eat a kazayas, but now I get, or a what's it called, a koveris, right? That's the amount that you can't eat on Yom Kippur, a fig's amount. But I can eat now, but I now can't eat even less. He wouldn't agree to that because he doesn't hold a visser kol at all. So that doesn't matter according to all opinions. Good place to stop because Bishlama starts the next item, and we're getting tired. So we'll stop here. Bishlama l'reish lakish.